Ajax has hit an all-time low point despite a long history of success in Europe, and we're going to talk about why and how much of it is their own fault here on Stoppage Time at Pints and Punditry. Welcome back to Pints and Punditry here at the Pitchside Pub. Thanks for joining us. We're going to talk about Ajax today and what a disaster over the weekend, having to abandon a game because of the fans rioting. Another bad loss. They finished the game up a few days later to Feyenoord, lost 4-0. It's an absolute disaster at Ajax. They're sitting way down on the table, and this is a really tragic run for such a storied, historic franchise that was in a Champions League semi-final, not that long ago. This is, 4 or 5 years ago. So they have come so far down in the past few years, and it's really a shame to see, and a lot of that is their own doing, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Before I do, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below, like the video while you're at it. I want to get your comments on this, how much of this was preventable. Hit that comment section below for me, and of course follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. Ajax is a mess. They're such a mess right now, and this is the low point, right? It's got to be uphill from here, and so much of it has been unfolding over the past year, and I'm not going to go into all the details with the management change and the coaching change with Ten Hag leaving, and there's some great articles out there that break it all down. In fact, I'll link one in the description here. This is not the video to go into all of these details, but what I want to talk about today is how much of it is their own fault and their own mismanagement, and a lot of this does fall on them, and the fact that they have just operated in what appears to be a very selfish manner, and unfortunately, perception is reality, particularly when you're talking about the fans, and that's the stuff that leads to rioting. Now, I want to go on record as saying that nothing excuses the behavior of Ajax fans over the weekend. The rioting, the looting, the destroying the stadium, throwing flares on the pitch is never okay. You put the players at risk, you put yourselves at risk. It's just stupid, right? It's inappropriate, unacceptable behavior, and nothing justifies it. But I do understand the frustration that leads to it. And you need a better outlet, Ajax fans, figure it out. But I do understand the frustration because while this is probably not completely accurate, and there's always stuff going on behind the scenes that even the media doesn't know about and doesn't report, the perception is that they have made a ton of money, and you have to wonder where it's gone. Now, it's not fair to a certain extent because they have spent a ton, particularly last summer in the transfer window. They spent about 100 million euros spread out over a bunch of different players. One of the problems is they have not done it well, right? And their sporting director leaving and a duo of guys running it now, making the decisions, has obviously not worked. So this goes all the way to the top with they have an interim CEO, and the lack of leadership is obviously showing from the top down. Not having a strong manager on the pitch doesn't help that. You would think the CEO is the one driving the ship and it comes down, but the manager is the most high profile leader at any club, and they can dictate a lot and present a lot of stability. And with Erik Ten Hag being gone, and he's not always the best person to promote stability, as we've seen at Manchester United, but at Ajax he was, and they won, and he portrayed having it all together, and the perception here is what matters, and they don't have that now, and they're almost certainly looking at a coaching change coming up, but that's not going to help things. They've got to change how they're doing business. Now, Ajax has always been a selling club. The Eredivisie is a selling league, right? There's a developmental league, for lack of a better term, and I hate to discount it like that because there's some really good football being played in that league. And look at what Feyenoord and PSV are doing this year, and they're young, exciting teams with a lot of good talent, but we know that as that talent develops and grows, it's going to go elsewhere. They're going to go to the bigger leagues, and that's always happened, and that's been Ajax's MO for a long, long time, but they've always replenished. They've also always remained competitive, at least for the majority of that time, and they have kept the players as long as they could to continue to put a competitive product on the field. And I believe, in my perception, that is what has changed recently, is they are selling these players for these incredible amounts of money. They're not replenishing it properly, right? They're not replenishing that pipeline of the next young player to sell off and continue this process. They're not remaining competitive, but they're also selling them earlier than they used to. And that's not all their fault, The market has changed, particularly with Premier League money being thrown around. Teams are willing to spend massive sums on young, unproven players, and it's tough for Ajax to say no to, and we have seen some examples of that. But what it's also doing is it's selling off their talent before they've been able to replenish it. The two biggest examples of this recently were Antony and Ryan Gravenberch being sold last summer, not this past summer, but the summer before, to Manchester United and Bayern Munich, respectively. That's a couple of really young players who in past years would have stuck around for another year, maybe two, at Ajax before going for the big sum. Now, the Antony thing is really interesting because obviously it was Erik ten Hag, the former Ajax manager, who went to Manchester United and bought his own player, and it was just a ridiculous amount of money, and so I don't necessarily expect Ajax to turn it down, but that's a guy they were counting on for that season, and then they just couldn't resist the money. And while the fans have some understanding of that, and they know who Ajax is and where they are in the European landscape, they're not okay with not winning, and that left a massive hole on the team. And I've been making videos for about a year saying, is Ajax doing more selling than bringing in talent? And the answer has clearly become yes. Ryan Gravenberch was another example. Now, he was not an exorbitant fee. It was, I think, about 18 million euros to Bayern Munich, but that makes it even less justifiable because another year of Ryan Gravenberch at Ajax would have benefited everybody involved. Now, you can't change the player's mind, right? If he feels like he's ready to go to the next level and he wants out, to a certain extent, it's, do you want to be here or not? But that's always been the case with these young players at Ajax, and they've sold the Frankie de Jongs and the Matthias de Ligts and all these big name, big fee players, but they got a few years out of them and they were competitive. De Ligt was only 19 when he got sold, but he was a superstar in the making, and he was part of that Champions League run. Frankie de Jong, they didn't sell till he was 22. I have to wonder if it was a couple years later, if he would have been sold a year or maybe two earlier, and they don't get to make that run. So the landscape is changing. It's not all Ajax's fault that the Premier League has all this money to throw around, and teams like United are willing to spend 86 million euros on Antony at age 20. And they just did it with, Rasmus Højlund, and they're throwing big sums of money around at relatively unproven players, and that fits right into Ajax's wheelhouse. But at some point, they need to say, no, we got to win the damn league, or our fans are going to revolt, which is literally what happened. We got to make sure we're getting to the Champions League. We got to make sure we are competing in the Eredivisie, and yeah, 86 million euros is a lot to turn down, but it'll be there next year, or at least most of it will be, and we got to go win some damn games. And that's what I feel like is not happening. And then you couple that with the fact that they are spending the money that came in, but they're not spending it well, and that has just compounded the problem for fans, because the MO was always, okay, we get these young guys, we know they're great, we'll watch them for a few years, and then we'll support them as they go on their way, and we'll take the big chunk of money that comes in, and we'll go off and get more young players, and they continue to develop and continue to develop. It's that last part that's not happening. It's that continuation of the development process, and they went out and spent a bunch of money on more established players that should have been able to come in and help them win the Eredivisie. And that's a fine philosophy on paper, albeit a short-term one that I don't love, that doesn't fit in their model, but theoretically that should have worked. But that only works when you get the signings right, and they have not, and the players have not gelled, and they have not played up to the level that they thought, and certainly not befitting their price tag. And even though they spent $100 million in the Eredivisie, or 100 million euros, I should say, last year, and that's an unheard of amount of money in one transfer window, it's still not a lot of money. So when one of those guys costs between 20 and 30, that's still a giant chunk of your budget. You can't get it wrong. So when they underwhelm, the team's in trouble. Then you get into poor coaching, poor management, poor leadership, and the whole thing crumbles, and that's how you end up, in 13th, 14th, 15th place in a league that you should be dominating. So it's really all coming to fruition, and you have to hope that this is an all-time low point for Ajax, but a lot of this is their doing. They've gotten a little greedy. They've gone after the big money, and yes, it's there and it's tough to ignore, but at some point they have forgotten that they've got to win the damn league. And that selling all this talent, yes, that's the business model, and yes, that's their MO, but it can't be at the expense of winning, and it never was, right? It was always, okay, let's hold on to him for an extra year, and let's go win while the next guy develops. And it's that last part that's not happening. That now coupled with the fact that PSV and Feyenoord are running their businesses better and they're getting more talented and the competition has really stepped up in the Eredivisie, and you've got a perfect storm of things going wrong that have sort of collapsed upon Ajax. So they're a legendary franchise or club. They'll get it right. They need new management, permanent CEO, permanent scouting director, permanent coach. Get all those things in there, and they'll turn this around in a year or two. They're too good not to, and they're in a league where they've got a financial advantage over most of their competition. So it's very doable, but this is not good for Ajax, and it is mostly their own doing. I understand the fans' frustration, but stop breaking shit. That's not good for anybody. I would love to get your thoughts. Get in those comments below. What else have I missed? What else has Ajax done wrong? Am I putting too much of the blame on them? Were you one of the fans rioting? Let me hear your side of things. I just, get in that comment section. I would love to get the conversation going. You can also start the conversation on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. And of course, if you don't already, like the video and subscribe to this channel for me. We'd love to have you around. Love to get the discussion going. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.